If you're a health or a life coach who wants to grow your coaching business in 2026, you need to know how to create really amazing content to market your coaching business. In this episode of the Wholehearted Business Show, I'm sharing a mini training on how to create content that really is going to connect with your ideal clients so that you can attract more paying clients into your coaching business. Let's dive in. Hi there, welcome to the Wholehearted Business Show. I'm Laura. I help heart-centered and highly sensitive health and life coaches get more clients, grow the business, and live the best lives while they do it. And today on the show, I'm actually going to share a mini training that I created for an older program that I had. And this training is all about how to create content that connects. And I'm sharing this today because as we approach the end of 2025 and as we're looking ahead into 2026, it's really good to think about some of the things that are going to move the needle when it comes to having a more successful business next year. And one of those things, the last few episodes of the show have been along this theme. Last week we had a fantastic planning episode where I ran a full planning workshop that you can do with workbooks and everything. So do go and check that out if you haven't already seen that. It's amazing. And the previous episodes as well were all on topics and themes that I feel as someone who coaches people and mentors people in this coaching space that are going to make a massive difference in creating content for your coaching business to market your coaching business that is going to create connection with people is one of the ways that you can have a more successful business in 2026. So I want to just share this mini training so that you can get the full information, all of the information. If you are listening on the podcast and you enjoy this, you might want to check out it on YouTube because there's going to be some really simple slides on YouTube as well. So do come and check it out over here, or you can just listen to it on the podcast as well. You'll still get lots out of it. So without any further ado, let's dive into that training. Hi everybody. So in this video, we're going to be talking about creating content that connects. So this is really important when it comes to us being coaches, being wholehearted humans in our businesses, is that we are using our content to communicate and connect with people. And that is really about sharing a little bit of who we are, our own opinions, all of this kind of stuff that we're going to get into. And what this really does is when people feel a connection with us, they're more likely to want to work with us, to buy from us. And that's really the name of the game when you're a coach and you want to get clients. So that's what we're going to cover in this mini video. So before we dive into that, I just wanted to introduce you to the 3 different types of content. And these really help me, these categories, just really help me when it comes to planning content and just to get my head around kind of the different roles that the content in my business plays. So we've got attraction, connection, and sales. These are fairly self-explanatory. And what you tend to find is that a lot of the content that you create will tick multiple boxes. So attraction content is obviously really important because this is the content that we are creating with the aim that new people are going to find us through that piece of content. And often this is where we want to be the most strategic in what it is that we're creating. So we want to be thinking about, is our content going to work for SEO? Are we doing SEO research? And not just SEO on Google, SEO on Pinterest and SEO on YouTube and things like that, depending on what our content ends up being. But attraction content is really important to think about. And then we've got connection content. So again, this is really important, but obviously this is what we're going to be diving into in a bit more detail. But this is about how we build relationships with people, build that trust, build that authority. And when I say authority, it's not that kind of, fake authority. Really what we're doing is we're just demonstrating that we actually know what it is that we're talking about, which can be key when it comes to getting clients. And then we've also got sales content. So this is content that helps people consider your services. So it can be topics like, for example, what happens in a health coaching session would be a sales piece of content because you can talk about how a coaching session is structured, and that's going to help someone when they're making the decision around whether or not they want to work with you as a coach, because you've helped them to see themselves in that role as client. That can be really, really helpful creating something like that. And also there might be a little element of attraction content because if you're writing that as a blog post, then there's the possibility that content could get found from SEO. But the way that I tend to categorize my content with this is what's the leading factor in me creating this piece of content? What's the primary driver for it? Am I creating this specifically because I want people to find this on Google, for example? And that kind of helps to shift where that sits. And then when it comes to the connection type of content, and like I say, this isn't about saying that, when you're writing an attraction piece of content that you don't want anything in there that's going to connect with people, but you do want it to be, it probably is going to be slightly different from something where you are solely doing it as a connection piece. And something when it comes to connection, I think the easiest way to approach this is to just be yourself. Although I have got a little kind of disclaimer there just to add, I do recognise that for some people with marginalised identities, just being yourself might not be as easy as I'm going to make it out. So I just wanted to check my privilege there a little bit. I wish there was some easy answers to this, but I don't honestly think there is. And I think it's a very individual thing to negotiate. So I just wanted to add that in there. But being yourself might look like using your own tone of voice when creating written content. Sometimes what we do, especially if we've gone from a different professional background into becoming a coach, is that we've lost the art of writing in our own tone of voice. And we're used to writing in perhaps a more professional tone of voice in a certain way, depending on what our previous jobs were going to be. So I think there's a bit of an art to getting back into that. And then another thing that we can do is make video and audio part of your core content, or at very least your secondary content, because these forms of content work very well for connection. I think these can be super useful when it comes to, when people get to hear your voice and get to see your face. I just realised I haven't got my video on for this training. I should have had my little video on in the corner. But when people get to see your face and hear your voice, it really does help to foster a connection really, really quickly. And that is so, so helpful when it comes to building those relationships with potential clients. We also want to be incorporating your values and message into your content. Now, this isn't about sitting down and directly, here I'm going to talk about my message and values. It's kind of something that we weave into what it is that we do. And honestly, I think the best way to do this is just to be yourself, really, to kind of go back around in a bit of a circle there. But thinking about ways that you can, however it is that you coach, whatever your style is, whatever makes you different, all of that jazz, like how can you weave that into the content that you're creating so that people get a sense of, this person's a life coach around careers and can see that she just thinks differently, like her approach is this approach, whereas other people's is this. How can you weave that into your content so that people get a sense of that? Another thing that you can do is to share vulnerable experiences. Now, this is a really interesting one, and I want to be very, very clear about this. There's no prerequisite for anyone to share any experience that they've had. It is completely up to you. And I think we've got to be really careful about how we share and what we share. Obviously, it's a totally individual decision, but sometimes it can feel really good to share an experience that you've had that might be a bit vulnerable, and it might make you feel a little bit vulnerable. And again, there's no reason why you have to do that at all. But something that I recently heard and that I really liked this way of phrasing around it was to share those vulnerable experiences from the scar, not the wound. By which it means is that when you are still in the pain of an experience or in the mess of an experience, it might not be the best time to share that. Whereas sharing from the scar, when you've healed or when you've come out the other side, that might be a more empowering place to share from that experience. This is a really interesting one because, it's a very individual thing. What I found in my business is that sometimes the really vulnerable stuff that I've shared has been the most powerful and actually getting the most, profound replies from people, and it's really stuck out. But again, it's a very personal boundary thing, and that's something that you need to explore and feel out and see what kind of feels okay and good to you. And then another thing that you can do is just make sure that you're including your own lived experiences and opinions and what it is that you create. And just a quick note around this, because I think there's been a real shift for the better in terms of the content that people are creating into a evidence-based, approach, which is fantastic. However, and I'm, talking to health coaches and nutritionists here quite a lot, is that it's still okay to share your experiences and opinions. They also have value. I think what we just want to be doing is being very, very clear what's got an evidence base and what's your opinion. But I say this because I think there was a time when people would really hold themselves back and not fully express themselves because they were really scared of getting something wrong. But the bottom line is, if when we're talking from your lived experience is not wrong, that's your lived experience, and that's very, very valid. And your opinions are really, really valid, and they can be beneficial to be shared. So again, I think there's ways that we can do that. And again, it's a very personal thing to explore, but I think all of these things really can help to create that connection with people in a really strong way. Another thing to consider is that you don't have to put yourself in a box. There are hundreds of ways of creating content to grow a business that works. You don't have to do what everyone else is doing. For many of us, creating content is how we show up in the world. And I think what we don't have to do is edit that. I saw this fantastic quote on Instagram that really struck in my mind. And it was like, it's the capitalist business system that squeezes us into these boxes and where we can't share, which keeps us in these tiny little niches and and that means we can't be fully fledged humans. And that is not the approach that I want to have in my business. I want to be a full wholehearted human in my business and actually be a person. So it's just a reminder really that you don't have to fit yourself into this little box if you want to be more expressive, if you want to talk about topics that are not directly linked to your niche. I think absolutely fine. I think there's ways of doing it that might be more beneficial, which is we'll get onto in a sec. But actually, I think it's a really good thing to just share the stuff that we want to share from that place of, I have a message and I want to share it. And that's really helpful as well. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about consistency with your content as well. Again, this kind of the theme of this mini video being around creating that connection, and really how we do that is by showing up as a fully fledged human. So content marketing sometimes can feel very structured, like masculine energy type of thing. And because to a degree it is. But the way that I try and see it is that the systems that we can build around us are like the masculine container for the more feminine, flowy energy. And I think that's a really, really great way to partner those things up. So most of us just aren't designed to just churn out content on a consistent basis, particularly if we're a one-person business without a large team. However, we do need to be consistent. So we have a bit of a conundrum there. So how do we get to define what consistency looks like for us? And can we build systems around that that's going to help us to have some kind of consistency? So consistency doesn't have to be daily. It doesn't have to be weekly. It doesn't mean never taking a break. You get to decide what that looks like in your business, and you get to create that, whatever that needs to look like for you. So in terms of content creation strategies for Wholehearted Humans, a few things to consider. First of all, don't expect to turn on your creativity like a tap. It's going to ebb and flow. That's the natural way of the world. Sometimes in life and business, we do just have to sit down and get something done. That's the way of it. However, we do, as much as we possibly can, tap into like our natural way of being. I think that is a really, really good thing. So what systems and processes can we build around you to support your humanness? So for me, this is lots of things like scheduling. So it means that if I feel really creatively inspired at one particular day, I can create a lot of stuff and then I can schedule it out so that creates the consistency in terms of showing up. And that can be really, really helpful. How can you capture ideas when they come to you? How can you be more in the moment if that's your style? Can you batch content, which is creating a bunch of content in one go when you feel inspired? Like, what can that look like for you? Because there's no right or wrong way. Like, the way that I do it might not be the way that you need to do it. So I really think that considering what this needs to look like for you and looking at what systems and strategies we can put in place to support you can be really, really helpful. So a few actions from this mini video. What does consistency look like for you? What elements can you incorporate into your content that's going to help with connection? So the things that I mentioned there were things like video, audio, your message and values, talking from your lived experience. And again, these are kind of slightly abstract things to try and, let's say we're talking about your Instagram content. It's like, okay, so in some ways that's slightly easier because, you've kind of got like these little snippets of content, whereas for a blog post, it might be a little bit trickier. But how can you weave some of these elements in? And what does that look like? How can you show up more as yourself? How can you be more yourself? How can you make sure that you're using your own tone of voice? That kind of thing, I think is really helpful. How does creativity show up for you? So in what ways, do you need to be very much in the moment? Or can you sit down and say, okay, on Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to do this, and you can do it and that's fine. Really think about what your creativity looks like and how that shows up. And then think about what supportive systems can you build around yourself to allow you to be creative in your own natural way. So again, things like, do you need to have a system that allows you to schedule content in advance? Do you need to be able to batch content? Do you need to give yourself the time and space every couple of weeks to be able to do that? Those kind of things I think are really, really helpful. So there we have it, guys. There is your creating content that connects mini training. I really hope that you found this helpful. If you are watching on YouTube, please do leave me a comment below and let me know what out of this training you're going to implement in your business for 2026. And if you're listening on the podcast, please do just pop me a DM on Instagram. I'm at wholeheartedlylaura. Please let me know if you've enjoyed this episode of the show. I always love to get feedback from anyone who is listening and finds the show helpful. Okay, guys, I will be back next week for the final episode of 2025. I'm going to share a bit of a review of my year, kind of the personal ups and downs, the business ups and downs, all of that stuff, all of the money numbers, all of that juicy things. That's going to be next week, so do stay tuned for that. And I will see you then. Take care. Bye.